Yo, yo, yo. Hey, guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. In my regular episodes with Dr. Christian Coachman, we bring you a two-part series with one of the most brilliant minds, brilliant teachers in all of dentistry, Dr. Bill Robbins. And we broken this up into two parts. So the first part is we just get inside the mind of this brilliant teacher and learn a little bit more about his story, and you're going to love it. And in part two, which is the next episode, so you're going to have to hold on tight for that one, he explains the difference in teaching and presenting a beautiful case and why it's so important to understand the difference. So make sure you guys check this out. I know you'll enjoy it, and we'll see you soon.
Hello to you, Kirk. Once again here on our Tuesdays together, bringing our both communities together. I'm loving this, and I want this to go forever. So we're going to continue interviewing people, chatting with each other. What I love about this is that by having two of us asking questions to one great person, we can approach this person from different perspectives, bring my background, bring your background. Also give us some time as one is asking one question, the other one is thinking, what is the best next question to make? And it's working very well. So it's great to have one more guest here. And I always say, and he always answers, no, that's not true. But I always emphasize that once again, he is one of my mentors, one of the guys that I most admire on the lecturing circuit. As I say, there are many great clinicians giving lectures, but there are very few real teachers giving lectures. That's why we love the real teachers, and I can name maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 names that I really admire, not only as a clinician, but I admire as a teacher. And Bill Robbins is among these few as I call thought organizers. And this can be confirmed by his amazing book with another guy that I admire so much, Jeff Rouse, Global Diagnosis, his book that I suggest in every single lecture I give as one of the best books to not only give you a recipe to treatment plan, but make you understand how to think, the thinking process. So for me, it's a great honor to have Bill here in our podcast. Not talking about the regular topics. I interviewed Bill many times, you as well, Kirk, not talking about him giving a lecture about a clinical topic, but we understanding who is Bill as a person, Bill as a dentist, Bill as a teacher. So welcome, Bill. Please say hello to our community.
Oh, it's indeed a pleasure to be with both of you today. Two of my favorites on the earth. I get to see Kirk fairly often, and we get to talk, but I don't get to see you very often. And so it's just a pleasure to see your face and hear your voice. And thanks for the invitation today. And the other thing is, it's always interesting to me that in the hierarchy of things, we always consider the old guy to be the mentor and the younger person to be the mentee. I mean, that's just the way the world is kind of set up. And I'm a couple of decades older than you, and yet clearly I consider you to be an important mentor to me. And so it really transcends age for sure.
What an honor.
We may get into it or not. I don't know about how we met and so on, but certainly I consider you. It's interesting that you would say that you consider me to be a mentor, because I feel exactly the same way about you.
Yeah, but having you saying that shows why you are my mentor. Just this super genuine, humble approach to everything that comes to you being so positive about things. You are one of the most positive persons I met, for sure. And I know life is not easy to anybody, and life is maybe we're not always easy to you, but you always had this very positive approach to things, always with a smile on your face. And that is one more reason why I love chatting with you and learning from you. And getting this opportunity, we always talk a lot about dentistry, but for me is also a unique opportunity to get to know you a little bit beyond that. And my first question to you is, why dentistry to start with?
Yeah. Why dentistry is the easiest one to answer for me, because I never knew anything different. My grandfather was a dentist. My two uncles were dentists. My father was a dentist. And I know I don't approach your 8 or 9 generations of dentists, but I did have this background. And when I was growing up, my father's dental office was in our home. Back in many years ago, it was that way in the United States. You'd have home upstairs and dental office downstairs. And so I followed my dad around as a little kid in the dental office. And I loved my dad. And he was a great man. And his patients loved him. He had a great personality. And I still remember sort of early in my time of following him around the office. And then later, when I was actually in dental school, and in the summer, I would hang out with him in the office some, and he would walk out of the office, and he treated blue collar patients pretty much. And so they would be mechanics and farmers, and they would say, "So son, I hear you're going to dental school." And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm in dental school." And they say, "If you're half the dentist your father is, you'll be a hell of a dentist." And so I grew up with a very positive attitude about the profession, and really never considered anything else. If you're a Robbins boy, you just become a dentist. That's just the way it was. And sort of the final chapter of that is my son Andrew just graduated from dental school 3 weeks ago. And so he's fourth generation. So we're trying to catch your 8th or 9th.
Ah, man, I better move.
And he literally is just starting his DSD Residency program last Friday. So he's going to do another year now and try to grow up as a dentist. So it's an easy question to answer. That's all I ever knew was dentistry.
Fantastic. Now, since you had this amazing, because my father's also a dentist, but I was never a teenager or a young person that wanted to, go to my father's office. I was never there. And my father was very casual about it, never pushed us, never took us. And it was a last minute decision, kind of the opposite of you. So you had this opportunity to really see dentistry done by your father many decades ago. That was what decade was that?
Oh, well, it was, this is my 50th year practicing dentistry. So, it was 60, 70 years ago when I was in that process of making a decision about being a dentist.
And people say that dentistry is going through a disruption now. It would be cool to understand, how do you compare dentistry done at that time? And what are the things that catches the most your attention about what you saw happening in a practice 60 years ago and what you see in the practice happening now?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a dichotomy there. That which makes dentistry so fun, so enjoyable is the relationship part of it. And my father was not a great clinician. He was actually a farmer who loved to farm, and dentistry just supported his bad habit of farming. And so he didn't have the same passion for dentistry that I have. So it was the relationship part that I first learned about when I hung out with him, and how he related to his patients and how much they loved him. So what drew me into dentistry, I think, was the relationship, not the technical part. I mean, from the clinical part, obviously, dentistry is so much better in so many ways. Back in his day, what he would do, I would stand there and watch him, and he would extract 28 teeth on a patient and put in an immediate denture. I mean, that was a normal day for him. Well, that's not my normal day anymore. We don't do that anymore. But But the relationship part of it
Yeah.
that you taught me, I think, is what drew me into it. And I would say at this stage, it's what still is the most rewarding for me, because I'm still practicing, but I'm practicing part-time. I sold my practice to a young prosthodontist 3 years ago, and she's been a wonderful friend and boss now, actually. And what brings me to the office these days, what I continue to enjoy doing here, is primarily seeing my old patients. So I'm still doing dentistry, and I do some sophisticated dentistry. I don't work near as hard as I used to, but I see my old patients that are really her patients now, and I have time. I'm not rushed anymore, and so I have time to sit and talk with them. And so it's interesting. What brought me to dentistry was the relationship part of it, and what's going to usher me out at the end is the same. And then there was a lot of technical dentistry in between, for sure.
All right. So, Bill, I have a question. What would you consider the keys to having a successful and happy career in dentistry?
Well, I think we all go through many different passages in our lives. And, you know, I went to the Pankey Institute many years ago, and I learned about the cross of life and, you know, the 4 arms of the cross and happiness in the center. And I've come to believe that it's a very difficult and perhaps even a false thing that we're trying to attain with this goal of living our life in balance. And I struggled with that concept, and maybe we'll talk about that a little more. So for a young dentist that's 32 years old, let's say she has a husband, she's got a couple of kids, she's got a full-time practice that she's actually bought into. So she's not doing this as a hobby. This is her career. The idea of living your life in balance is impossible. If you're building a practice, it's going to take more of your effort than the play side of your life. So I'm not demeaning play and family and worship. I think those things are incredibly important. But certainly there are times in your life passages when you're going to have to commit more to one of those 4 arms than the other. So I think, you know, the success of a young dentist is going to take a lot of work. And there's just no way around it. And I think the next part of it is you can't do it by yourself. Clearly, you have to have people taking this walk with you. I've had so many people along the way that have helped me from the business side, the professional side, and the emotional side, and the behavioral side. And dental school is literally just tipping your toe into the pool. And I see that with my son. And he's smart enough to realize it. I mean, he is a rank beginner and all of the things that we just talked about. And so he's going to have to enlist a lot of people along the line to help him in this journey. The other part is what I've loved in my career is watching the light bulb go on. And I know that Christian and you also have experienced that a lot. And that's when you're working with a younger dentist or a student or a resident, and all of a sudden they get it. There's some concept that they get. And that feeling, I think, transcends almost any for me as a teacher. When I see a light bulb go on the mind of a young dentist, and they get either a vision or at least they get an idea of what we were talking about, what the goal was for the discussion we were having. And so the thing I love is being around I love young dentists. I love dental students and young dentists and residents because they make me feel young. They energize me. And when the light bulb goes on in one of their heads, and occasionally, less now, in all honesty, but occasionally the light bulb goes on in my head also. So there's still clearly a give and take. And that would probably be a pretty good segue, I think, Christian, for you and me to talk about how in my late 60s, you captured my imagination.
One thing just to comment, you mentioned relationships. I would definitely say this is one of the pillars for success. Mastering the art of relationships, as you said, one of the main things you learned from your father. I did learn this from my father as well. My father is a master on relationships as well. and was the key for his success, besides being a very good dentist. The other thing you mentioned was, finding great mentors. I think that's another pillar, a shortcut to success, finding great mentors, and lucky the students that have you as a mentor and can listen to you and have their light bulbs going on because they're interacting with you. But going back to your career, you said that once in a while light bulbs still come off, and that's amazing. That's what we talk about, the beginner's mind. Even though you're a master, you are an extremely mature, successful professional, you still are open and you're still willing to learn, and once in a while you still are excited about learning something. If you could look back into your career and explain the main landmarks, the main moments where you had these huge light bulb coming off, what were the key happenings or personalities or things that you went through that really bumped your career up?
So I'm gonna tell you about two. I'm gonna tell you about the beginning and the end, or closer to the end. So as I told you more about my father, and what a wonderful human being he was, but he wasn't passionate about dentistry, as I've already said. He worked half a day a week. Half a day. He worked in the morning and he'd go and take a nap, and in the afternoon he'd go to the farm. And so that's what he loved to do. He loved to farm. And when I was in my third year of dental school, I just assumed I was going to come back and work with my father. That's what you do. I went to school in Memphis, Tennessee. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's about a 2.5-hour drive. And I just assumed I would go back. He had room for me, and I'd go back to Little Rock and I'd go to work with him. That's what you did in those days. You worked with your father. And when I was in my third year of dental school, one day we were talking and he said, I've been hearing about a program called an internship for young dentists that just graduate. And I think you ought to consider doing that. And I said, I haven't heard about that. What is it? And he said, well, it's a year that you spend after you graduate from dental school, and you learn some more. And then after that, if you want to come back and work with me, that'd be great. And I said, well, how do you find out about that? And he said, go to the VA hospital in Memphis, and they have a program there, and go talk to them. I said, okay. So I went to the VA hospital. I found out about this dental internship. They didn't call them GPRs back then. They called them an internship. And I applied for it because my dad told me to. You do what your dad tells you. I got into the program and I loved it. It was amazing. And I learned so much in that first year that my head was spinning. And so that was the first indication to me that there was more than what I'd learned in dental school. Mm-hmm. I had to pay a year back for the year that I did. That was the way it was back then. So during my second year in the VA, when I was paying back for my internship, I decided that I wanted to get more education. And when I'd done my internship, I was with 3 months with a periodontist and 3 months with an endodontist and so on through the program. And when I would finish the 3 months, I'd want to be a periodontist. And then I would go to oral surgery. And after the 3 months in oral surgery, I'd want to be an oral surgeon. And so at the end of this thing, I realized I really enjoyed the whole breadth of dentistry. And the VA had just started a 2-year general practice residency. And so during my second year, when I was paying it back, I applied for that. I got in, I went to San Diego, and I did a 2-year GPR. And it was at that point that I was hooked into the academic side of dentistry. I just loved it. And so they sent me back to San Antonio. That's how I got to San Antonio to pay back for my residency program. There was a residency at the VA. I became director of that program. I started teaching a little bit at the dental school. And at this point, I was hooked in academics. And I've always been so grateful to my father for many, many reasons. But one of the reasons is that he had a vision for me that I didn't have for myself. And he essentially gave me the freedom to go off and pursue this other career. And he would have loved to have practiced with me. We would have had fun together. It would have been a successful practice. But he knew the type of dentistry he was practicing wasn't going to be rewarding to me. And he knew that he knew that there was more there for me than a career pulling teeth in Little Rock. And so he gave me the freedom and sort of pushed me out of the nest to do the academic thing first. And I never returned. And I never went back and practiced with my father, but I think he was very proud of the academic career that I had. And he never saw me in private practice because he died before I was in academics for 25 years, and he died before I went into private practice. So that was the front end, the freedom that my father gave me to sort of spread my wings. So let's go to the back end of the career. And it happened, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago it's probably 9 years ago when I first heard you speak. And, at this point in my career, we just written our textbook, Jeff, or we were conceiving the textbook. It was being written. And so I was fairly far down the road in my academic career. And I heard you speak. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Now, back in those days, you had to do your own keynote presentation. I mean, you had to do your own smile design and all. And so I wasn't all that good at technology. And so the first time I heard you speak, I thought it was really cool. But I went home, that was in Chicago on a Saturday. I went home on Monday and did nothing about it. And one of my buddies, Brian Vincey, you know Brian.
Yeah, very well.
He had already started doing digital smile design with you. And we were talking and he said, you have got to do DSD. He said it couples so beautifully with global diagnosis. You just have to do it. And I said, yeah, I know, but I didn't do it. And so then a year later, Brian and I were at a meeting together again in Chicago. And he said, so tell me about DSD. How are you doing with it? I hung my head and I said, well, I didn't do anything about it. He said, you have got to go take Coachman's residency program. And I said, okay. And so I signed up. I went to New York and it was at NYU. Still remember it very clearly. And you got up and spoke. You started the morning on a Monday morning. It was a full week. And I went up to you at a break and introduced myself. And you were very gracious and at least played like you knew who I was. And
of course,
so that was sort of the genesis of our friendship. And during the week, you then said, would you like to give a 15-minute presentation about global diagnosis? And I said, sure, it'd be my pleasure. And so that was the first time that you and I were sort of together talking about global diagnosis. And you were very complimentary about, the 15-minute presentation. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And I did then actually go home and start doing digital smile design. And it's hard. If you go to the residency program, it's hard to go home and do the first case. But once you get the first case done, the second case is easier. And the third case is easier. And it has been one of the most important and relevant things that have happened to me in the last decade for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's really fun. It really helps with this whole issue of patient communication. I mean, that is, for me, the crux of DSD, and that is the patient communication part of it. But it's also, I think, helped me to remain relevant because as I age and stand in front of groups, people know I'm getting older. And, in order to be relevant to a younger group of dentists, you can't be talking about gold restorations. I mean, I still do gold in my practice, but you can't lecture about that because it's not relevant anymore to them. And so DSD has brought a lot of pleasure to me in my clinical practice, but it's also helped me to remain relevant, I think, in the eyes of younger dentists, because as I lecture and incorporate this in my lectures, I still find that there's a small percentage of people that have really embraced this technology. It's amazing. After this 10 years of you teaching this, it's still, it's just the grass is so green.
Yes, it's still happening, and you cannot imagine. For me, it's just a beautiful thing to listen to all that you're saying. Of course, people can imagine coming from you. Amazing compliment. I 100% knew who you were. Okay, just to emphasize this. And somebody told me that you were coming before, and I was extremely honored, and even feeling the anxiety and the pressure to be actually teaching with you in the audience. And I had this crazy idea of inviting a mentor that I just met to actually teach in my own course live in front of everybody. And you were like, yeah, I have my laptop. If you want, I can do it. It was just crazy. And you went up there and you gave an amazing lecture as always. And as you said, the friendship started. Now, this also brings us to one thing that we both love, and that is teaching. And I want to understand, how did you fall in love with teaching? Why? And what are the main things that you admire on a teacher?
It's interesting. I didn't set out to become a teacher. That was never a goal for me. I didn't see myself in that way. So it was a very slow evolution for me. And as I moved from being a resident to being a director of a residency program, that happened fairly early in my career. So I became director of the GPR at the VA in San Antonio when I'd been out of my program just 2 or 3 years. And so I had to start to develop my teaching skills because clearly that was going to be an important part of what I did. And I can't honestly tell you that I remember who my mentors were because it's been so long ago and helping me learn to teach. I don't really know whether I had a group of people or whether I just observed what I thought, what I liked in a teacher. And as I think about it, people have asked me to help them learn to be teachers, and I don't think I'm much of a teacher of teachers. I don't know that I can take a group of people and teach them how to become a teacher. But as I think back about what I do, what I think I do and do well, is first of all, I spend a lot of time conceiving my lectures. In other words, this is not something that happens sort of on the fly. Like anything else, it takes a lot of work. And when I'm creating a new lecture, I make an outline. And so I am doing this in a very methodical way when I'm creating a lecture. And the latest lecture I've created is in some ways my most fun. And when we sort of went into the COVID lockdown, a lot of good things came out of that for me. I almost feel guilty because it was like a time of rebirth for me because I had free time that I'd never had before to be creative. And one of the things I started back in those days was a lecture that has now become my favorite one to give. And it's entitled A 50-Year Retrospective, My Failures and Lessons Learned. And it's a failures lecture. And one of my mentors many years ago said, always photograph your failures, especially yours, but any failures you see, because someday you'll be able to use them and learn from them. And it's very difficult to take photographs the day you fail. In other words, something happens, you break a file or the patient swallows a crown, something terrible in your practice. It's hard to make yourself photograph it, but I've always done it. And so I assume I've got one of the largest caches of failures of any clinical dentist on earth. And when I started this lecture, it started out with only 4 subjects, and now it's up to 21. So I send this menu of lectures to a study club, and I can only go over about 5 of them in a day. And therefore, the study club director can pick out the 5 that they want to go over, and that's what we do.
That's cool.
And so that kind of leads into the other part. So the first part about being a good teacher, I think it's got to be done very, very methodically. It has to be systematically, the lecture has to be created based on an outline. The second really important part is just the opposite. And I think that's telling a story. And I think that's something I do well. And the more you can tell a story when you're teaching, the more you connect with your audience. And so I would say that's the 2 primary areas that I've tried to work on through my career as a teacher. And that is being methodical and systematic in the creation of my presentations, but to attempt to tell a story throughout the presentation from beginning to end.
So there you have it. Inside the mind of a brilliant teacher in dentistry. Don't miss part 2, which Dr. Robbins explains the difference in teaching and presenting a beautiful case and what you need to know about that. So make sure you check that out. So until we hear from you next time, or you see us next time, keep watching or keep listening to the Best Practices Show. You guys have a great day.